Herbert Jones was a British Army officer and a recipient of the prestigious Victoria Cross, which was awarded posthumously after being killed in action fighting in the Falklands War at Goose Green. Jones was born in Putney, England. He is the oldest of three sons. He attended Eton College and DLD College in London. He joined the British military straight after school in the summer of 1960. Soon he was commissioned into the Devonshire Regiment as a second lieutenant. In 1962 he was promoted to lieutenant and 4 years later promoted to the rank of captain. In 1972 he was then promoted to major of the 3rd Infantry Brigade in Northern Ireland. He was tasked with finding Captain Robert Nerick, who was taken hostage by the IRA. After an intense search for Nerick, it was confirmed that he had been killed after being smuggled into the Republic of Ireland. For his service in Northern Ireland, he was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel and was also awarded an MBE. He was soon transferred to the Parachute Regiment. 2 years later, Jones was then awarded the OBE for service in the military. In March 1982, a scrap metal merchant ship arrived in South Georgia Island and raised the Argentine flag. It was later realized the Argentine military had infiltrated the scrap metal ship. This caused tensions between the UK and Argentina, and in April of the same year the Argentine junta ordered the invasion of the British-controlled Falkland Islands, kick-starting the war for the islands. The task force set sail on the 4th of April, with HMS Conqueror setting sail first. Lieutenant Jones was on board MV Norland with the rest of 2 para on their way to the islands to face the Argentine military. It took around 2 weeks to sail from the British Isles to the Falklands. When they arrived, the water surrounding the islands had a 200-mile exclusion zone to any Argentine ships and planes. The ARA General Belgrano being sunk on May 2nd, the British task force took control of the sea surrounding the islands. Soon, suitable landing sites for the troops were identified. Jones's 2 para, along with 3 para and 3 Commando Brigade, landed at San Carlos, codenamed Blue Beach. During the landing, the RAF and Royal Navy were in constant threat from the Argentine Air Force. When the beachhead was formed, they could set up the missile defense systems, making the job a little easier to defend from the Argentine jets. Once all of the troops landed, the next job was to move south to the Argentine garrisons at Darwin and Goose Green. Jones's 2 para was given the task of taking Goose Green garrison. He prepared his battalion for the assault and awaited orders to attack. Due to poor weather conditions, the attack had been called off, but due to continued pressure back in the British capital, the assault was ordered and 2 para advanced on the Argentines at Goose Green. Jones was very limited on resources when it came to the assault, with almost all of the British Chinooks lost on the Atlantic conveyor, so an air assault was out of the question. An attack from the sea was also not good due to the Argentine positions on the beaches. The Argentine forces consisted of around 1,000 men, along with 6 anti-aircraft guns, which could also be used on both air and ground defences. They also had a battery of 3 105mm artillery howitzers as well as air support from Port Stanley. The British had around 690 men with 3 fighter jets for close air support and HMS Arrow for shelling the defences. A night attack was chosen for the operation. Jones's plan was to move silently into position and have HMS Arrow attack the garrison with its 105mm guns to soften up the Argentine defences. This bombardment lasted for around an hour and a half, where she fired 22 star shells and 135 4.5-inch high-explosive rounds at the Argentines, who were dug in at Goose Green. At 3:35 a.m, HMS Arrow opened fire, signalling the start of the assault. At 7:30 a.m, 2 paras A and B companies' attack had halted due to tough resistance from the Argentine defences and the entire assault in jeopardy. Jones then led an unsuccessful charge along the base of Darwin Ridge. A company's Captain Dent and Corporal Hardman were killed in the charge along with 3 other men. Not long after they had fallen, Jones was seen running west up towards the Argentine trench with his bodyguard, where he was shot once. He then fell, got back up and was shot again in the side. He fell short of the trenches and within minutes he died. His men frantically raced to call an emergency evacuation for Jones. However, the helicopter was shot down when it was en route. For his actions, Lieutenant Colonel Jones was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross. With Jones's death, command was passed to Major Chris Keeble, who continued the attack and later defeated the Argentines at Goose Green. On May 28, 1982, Lieutenant Colonel Jones was commanding 2nd Battalion of the Parachute Regiment on operations on the Falkland Islands. The battalion was ordered to attack enemy positions in and around the settlement of Darwin and Goose Green. During the attack against an enemy who was well dug in with mutually supporting positions sighted in depth, the battalion was held up just south of Darwin by a particularly well prepared and resilient enemy position of at least 11 trenches on an important ridge. A number of casualties were received. In order to read the battle fully and to ensure that the momentum of his attack was not lost, Colonel Jones took forward his reconnaissance party to the foot of a re-entrant which a section of his battalion had just secured. Despite persistent, heavy and accurate fire, the reconnaissance party gained the top of the re-entrant at approximately the same height as the enemy's position. From here, Colonel Jones encouraged the direction of his battalion mortar fire in an effort to neutralise the enemy positions. However, these had been well prepared and continued to pour effective fire onto the battalion advance, which by now held for over an hour and under increasingly heavy artillery fire was in danger of faltering. In his effort to gain a good viewpoint, Colonel Jones was now at the very front of his battalion. It was clear to him that desperate measures were needed in order to overcome the enemy position and rekindle the attack, and that unless these measures were taken promptly, the battalion would sustain increasing casualties and the attack perhaps even fail. It was time for personal leadership and action. Colonel Jones immediately seized a submachine gun and, calling on those around him, with total disregard for his own safety, charged the nearest enemy position. This action exposed him to a number of trenches. As he charged up a short slope at the enemy position, he was seen to roll backward downhill. He immediately picked himself up and again charged the enemy's trench, firing his submachine gun and seemingly oblivious to the intense fire directed at him. He was hit by fire from another trench which he outflanked and fell, dying just a few feet from the enemy he had assaulted. A short time later, a company of the battalion attacked the enemy, who quickly surrendered. The display of courage Colonel Jones had completely undermined their will to fight further. Thereafter, the momentum of the attack was rapidly gained. Darwin and Goose Green were liberated, and the battalion released the local inhabitants unharmed and forced the surrender of some 1,200 of the enemy. The achievements of 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment at Darwin and Goose Green, set the tone for the subsequent land victory of the Falklands. The British achieved such a morale superiority over the enemy in this first battle that despite the advantages of numbers and selection of battleground, the Argentinian troops never thereafter doubted either the superior fighting qualities of the British troops nor their own inevitable defeat. This was an action of the utmost gallantry by a commanding officer whose dashing leadership and courage throughout the battle were an inspiration to all about him. Jones's Victoria Cross is currently on display at the National Museum in London. Jones was buried at the San Carlos Cemetery on the Falkland Islands. There was a road named after Jones in Port Stanley named H. Jones Road in his memory. His name is also on the South Atlantic Task Force Memorial in St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Hi, this is Paul from Hidden History. I'm working on a 3-part Falklands War series where I will try to offer a unique insight to the war and the events leading up to and after the war, so keep an eye out for that. This has been Paul from Hidden Histories, and I'll see you in the next video.